to members of the public and to the media. It's great to have everybody here in the chamber. I'll open us with a karakia, and then we'll have a minute's silence for Ralph Mountford. Mā te whakapono, mā te tūmanako, mā te tētero, mā te whakarongo, mā te mahitahi, mā te whakamaumori, mā te araha, ka taia e mātou. By believing and trusting, by having faith and hope, by looking and searching, by listening and hearing, by working and striving together, by shared desire and determination, by all being done with compassion, we will succeed. Right, I attended, councillors, the service of Ralph Mountford, a very, very long time Woodville resident. Ralph served 2 terms on the Woodville Community Board, followed by 2 terms on the Woodville Borough Council, being first elected in 1974. And then he was actually the last mayor of the Woodville Borough Council and served from 1986 to 1989. He then served 2 terms on the Tararua District Council from 1989 to 1995. And I guess what I reflected at Ralph's service is that those were the tough years. So in 1989, there were 850 borough councils that were amalgamated into just 86. The Tararua district was the very last of those because we couldn't reach agreement, and that's why we were told that we were becoming the Tararua district. So it was a very, very hard time to serve your local community, being Woodville, as mayor and doing the best here, and then very certainly a tough time here at council in those first 2 years. And I've had the privilege of talking to Bob Crotter and Bill Bly about just how tough those years were, financially, but also when you amalgamate, and I do talk about this often, when you amalgamate 4 different councils together, you've got different records and different standards, and it's taken us a long time. So at 34 years old, we are certainly a very young district, but Ralph served 20 years to local government, and that's a debt that we have to him. He's a man of great mana within Woodville, and also served as a Justice of the Peace for 28 years, which is a great commitment. So I certainly, if we could just have a minute's silence, please, to acknowledge that service for Ralph Mountford. Thank you, councillors. Right, we have no apologies for this morning's meeting. Declarations of conflicts of interest in relation to today's item of business. I will head straight into the report and the reason the meeting's been called, the Dennyview Compounded Supply request for funding. So Roger Earp is actually away today, but the chief will lead this paper.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Morena koutou. Obviously, a pretty important decision that we are asking Council to make today. One thing that is important to note is, even though that you'll see through the recommendations that there is a recommendation to delay the repair to the impounded supply, that doesn't mean that we're delaying the project in relation to the impounded supply. There's a number of work streams and programs of work that operate within that project that will continue and has continued for some time now. But as you'll see in this report, and I am going to go through the report in some detail, it does list a number of reasons why we're recommending this decision to Council today. So as I said, I usually will sit here and say, I'll take the report as read, even though I know that you've read it. I think it's really important for the public and others and for the recording that I do go through the report in detail. Another important thing to note is that it's not my report. There's a team behind this report that have all contributed to it, and it's going to be a bit of a tag team effort today. I will lead most of the discussions around the report, but there are experts in their field sitting in front of you, and they'll introduce themselves as they present their part of the report. But as I said before, this is a team effort. There's a significant project team behind this, not just with the staff that you see in front of us, but a large number of experts in their field that are providing advice to council. And we talk about those experts within the report as well, in terms of some of the challenges that they are facing as well. I note that at a couple of the public meetings for the impounded supply, I have openly spoken about how complex this is. And I know there's a lot of talk about maybe, we just got to get in there, rip the cover off, rip the liner up, fix the subsoil drainage system and fill it back in. We only wish that was the case, but unfortunately, there's a lot more work that's required, and we've got to get this right. And we absolutely got to get this right, because if we don't, we'll be back here in 10 years, and that's the last thing anyone in this room wants. That's the last thing anyone in our community wants. So we don't offer any apologies for slowing it down to ensure we do get it right. But, there is a but. We've got to ensure that a safe and reliable water source to Dannevirke is maintained, hence the recommendations in this report today. So as I said before, I'm going to go through the report now, and during that report, we'll hand over to some other key staff. For open and transparency purposes, there were questions that we did receive from our elected since the report was publicly released, and we're going to go through those questions at the end of presenting the item as well, so everyone in this room knows what those questions and answers are. Okay, so the reason for this report is to provide an update on progress since the 25% design peer review, and to request approval for the next steps in this program of works. This report does not seek a decision on whether to proceed or not with the physical repairs to the impounded supply. That will come at a later date. However, it does require on a decision on whether to proceed with solutions that will provide an increased level of resilience while permanent solutions are determined and implemented. These, we believe, are critical works to ensure, as I mentioned before, that a safe and reliable water supply is maintained for our community here in Dannevirke. If the impounded, I'm not going to go into a lot of the background, I think, because there's probably been about 16 reports over the past 18 months. Don't quote me on that number, that has talked about the leak detections in 2021 and how it was built in 2023. So what I want to go into now is around the impounded supply and what happens when we dewater that. So if the impounded supply fails or is required to be dewatered, effectively drained, Dannevirke will be solely reliant on water drawn directly from the Tamaki River with no buffer. So what that effectively means that we've got to take water straight from our source, and then we feed that through into our community. During high turbidity events, we have the ability to mix our impounded supply water with the river water, which makes treatment easier. The other advantage, obviously, having an impounded supply with water in it is that if there are really low flow river conditions, we're able to extract water from the dam. Obviously, without the dam, we're not able to do that. So one of the mitigations that we are looking at around the ongoing issues with the deterioration of the dam is that we will have to continue to monitor this closely, and we do have a list of recommendations around some of those mitigations. One of those mitigations includes operating the dam at 8 metres rather than at full capacity. This will ensure that the actual dam itself is placed under less stress, which does reduce the risk of imminent failure. And you will see that word imminent failure mentioned previously and now. However, we believe we can reduce the likelihood of that by implementing a range of monitoring techniques, I guess we'd like to call them, and reduce the capacity of that dam. So we think that imminent failure is less likely with the additional monitoring within the system. And as I mentioned, as we mentioned in the report, it is almost certain the impounded supply will continue to deteriorate as we work towards a permanent solution for the impounded supply. But as I said before, we can reduce the pace of that by implementing some key monitoring in regards to it. A progress report was presented to the Infrastructure, Climate Change and Emergency Management Committee titled Dannevirke Impounded Supply, and there is an attachment of that report to this report. The purpose of this report was to update the committee on the progress for remediation since the previous report in July 2023. In addition, the committee was informed of the detailed design 25% peer review workshops and provided an update on each of the enabling projects and lines of work. So I think what's important there is that there have been regular updates provided through to the committees ongoing since we first detected the leaks back in 2021. And there has been a lot of work going on in the backgrounds, but one thing that's been really critical to us is providing those updates through a public committee and through other avenues to ensure that this information is shared widely. And if those that are here are not aware, all that information is on our website. There's a page specifically for our impounded supply where you can find copies of all that information. It is important to note, since the September report, the detailed design 25% peer review workshops have occurred. The activity included 3 workshops, a review of the detailed design at the 25% completion point, a review of the risk register, and a safety and design workshop. So this workshop was facilitated by Tonkin and Taylor, who's our lead consultants in regards to this project. It was attended by 4 staff from Tararua District Council, including myself. There was also the peer review team from DamWatch, liner, cover suppliers and installers, including representatives from Australian geotextile companies. There was also a local earthwork contractor and supporting staff from Tonkin and Taylor. So what I can say about that that meeting, and I did attend, was that it was a very good and robust discussion, and everyone in that room and those online were committed to doing what was best for Dannevirke community and ensuring that we do come up with a good, robust design. The good thing about having a peer reviewer is that they challenged our experts. And I think this is a critical fact to note, that this isn't just us going to one consultant and going, here you go, tell us what we need to do. We're challenging them. We're looking at other alternates, and part of the delay is as a result of those peer reviews. But I'd rather that than us go with a recommendation from one consultant, which may not be the right solution. During the workshop, the peer review team, as I mentioned, challenged several of the options presented. This has caused additional analysis and ongoing interaction between the parties to finalise the recommendation for the liner system and to what extent. if any. The eastern embankment requires, or if the eastern embankment requires remediation. So at this point, we're still waiting for the results of that. There were some initial analysis sent around the eastern embankment of the dam. By all accounts, they've come back pretty positive. However, the peer reviewer picked up a couple other areas that they had concerns about, so required a few other additional tests to be done. So we're still waiting on the outcome of those tests to know whether or not the eastern embankment needs to be repaired or not. Our advice remains that repairing the impounded supply will significantly reduce the risk of failure, as the resulting structure will then be fully repaired. We'll also be implementing modifications to the inlet, outlet and spillway, additional monitoring equipment installed, and will meet modern seismic specification. I think it's a really important thing here that we're not, through this detailed design process, trying to do like for like. It's not just repairing what we had before, it is actually installing and putting in improvements to the impounded supply. So we can draw all the water out of it, maybe less, leaving 500 mil in there. We can monitor it with better accuracy. How the water was entering the dam, how the water exits the dam, all places different pressures and stresses on the impounded supply. So these need to be mitigated through the design phase. So, we're going to sit here and talk about the improvements that we're making. We're not going to be saying we just, replacing that engine with exactly the same engine. It's really important to improve it and get it right so it does last, the test of time. So I think that's a critical point. And also, if we were to rush that, are we going to be forced to do like for like? I want to talk about, you'll note in some of the previous reports, especially the last one in September 23, we did say that the repairs to the impounded supply would commence in January 2024. However, since that report, a lot more information has come to light. We've also had our peer reviewers challenging, as I mentioned before, around the liner and also around the eastern embankment. At that point, it wasn't, the peer review hadn't picked up some of those issues that they see. Hence the reason we made the comment, I guess, the public comment that these repairs would go ahead in January 2024. But there's a range of other reasons why we are delaying it, and I'll touch on that shortly. In addition, the advice was that pre-treatment capability was required prior to dewatering the impounded supply to mitigate the risk that council could not continue to meet its legislative obligation to provide compliant drinking water during turbid events, which could result in boil water notices. A key point for our recommendations is that for the impounded supply to be repaired this construction season, it was identified that it must be dewatered in late November 2023, and the earthworks commence in January 2024. This was essential to ensure contractors had the entire construction season available to complete repairs. Detailed design, as I've mentioned, has not progressed as quickly as anticipated, either due to the many challenges at the site, and the latest program provided pushes out the completion of design to January 2024. This impacts the procurement and commencement of earthworks. This also assumes weather that is conducive to the very weather-sensitive construction methodology. Another key point is the liner system design has also not been finalised, as it is also waiting on peer review confirmations, and as such, we are unable to order the required materials in time for them to be available for installation in March 2024, due to the long lag times from order to delivery. We're advised that the lead time for a relocatable pre-treatment plant to be constructed and installed is between 20 to 24 weeks. Officers have explored many options in this space, and our process engineer has identified that there are very few suppliers of this product that can deliver in the time frame specified. So when I talk about a relocatable pre-treatment, effectively it's a pre-treatment system in addition to our treated supply. So a relocatable one is potentially something that we can use elsewhere within the district. We can on-sell, or we can keep it in situ to add more resilience within the current impounded supply system. Because of the above factors, it is recommended that the decision to repair the Dannevirke impounded supply be delayed until we have all the information required. This is to enable you, councillors and mayor, to make a good and informed decision. At this point in time, if we were to provide the information that we currently have, we do not believe that we would be meeting the Local Government Act in terms of good decision making. Hence the reason why we are asking for a delay in the project. However, given the uncertainty of the impounded supply, it is recommended that various risk mitigation measures are implemented to ensure the ongoing security of the water supply to Dannevirke. These measures include purchase additional pre-treatment in the form of a relocation membrane plant to ensure a continuous supply of water in more adverse river flow situations. Purchase or repurchase a clip tank to provide supplementary raw water for periods of high turbidity. Purchase additional treated water storage in the form of a 6 megalitre tank. And we will continue to progress the following mitigation resilience measures. We'll continue to investigate an alternate water source for the Alliance Meatworks and an alternate source for the Dannevirke water supply. So we believe by continue to investigate these measures, this will provide additional resilience to the Dannevirke community. Ultimately, the Meat Alliance uses about 20% of our capacity. If we can remove them from that, that frees up 20% of supply for our town. And also an additional bore will enable us to alternate between each bore depending on the river flows. And we'll have officers talk a little bit more about both those options shortly. We'll also continue to investigate and implement demand management, including metering of unmetered users between the Tamaki River Gallery and Reservoir 2. A district-wide water conservation education program and water restrictions as and when required, both of which will have the aim of encouraging conservative water use, especially in times of restricted supply. We'll also look at enhancing the current dam safety monitoring regime and provide council with early warning of further deterioration. And the best chance to act to maintain the impounded supply in operation, the following actions are being taken. We'll look at purchasing a remotely operated underwater vehicle so that council officers can conduct site inspections of this and other district water infrastructure rather than contract in the service at a similar cost. So currently, as mentioned, we do contract that service out, which comes at a reasonably high cost. We believe we can reduce the cost of that by having our own remotely operated underwater vehicle and having an officer within council to operate that. We'll investigate the installation of flow meters on all the subsoil drains in the 2050 millimetre manhole. We'll conduct further failure mode analysis at different water levels to assess potential impact. We'll investigate the possibility of installing inception drains on the eastern embankment, and we'll assess the condition of the Tamaki River intake gallery to identify if any further remedial work is required. And I can say regarding that, progress has been made. We are looking at cleaning out that the gallery in terms of looking at what tree roots potentially have grown through there, and that has occurred in the past, I believe, as well. But also how we operate the valve system in terms of the settings. We believe we've already made some improvements in that area. Currently, we'll complete the detailed design of remediation of the impoundment issues. Once completed, a recommendation will be brought to council regarding repair or decommission of the impounded supply. So once again, we're not asking you to make a decision on whether to proceed or not, because we do not believe we have all the information required to enable that decision. I just briefly want to touch on the second recommendation within this report, and that's around the project objectives. During that workshop that I mentioned before around the 25% design review, it was identified by the peer reviewer that project objectives had not been set for the repairs. Subsequently, Tonkin and Taylor have prepared project objectives for approval, and it is recommended that council approve their project objectives that will guide the completion of the detailed design process. I'll now move into more information regarding the recommendations for 1.3 and 1.4. The Dannevirke water treatment plant is designed to treat water supplied from either the impounded supply or directly from the Tamaki River, and the impounded supply provides a raw water buffer for times of low flows and high turbidity events. A review of data from between 2019 and 2023 shows the occurrence of turbidity events on the Tamaki River has been highly variable, but it is expected these events will occur most years and at times will last for several days. Currently, the impounded supply provides water to the treatment plant during turbidity events, and this would be unavailable if it were dewatered or under repair. Supply would then be limited to the current 1 day of treated storage, which, if exhausted, would put Dannevirke's water into a non-compliant state. Non-compliant water may contain pathogens and requires the issuing of a boil water notice until the water supply network has been cleared for a full 3 days. During the summer of 2021 to 2022 was when council last issued a boil water notice for Dannevirke. This was caused by high turbidity in the Tamaki River, coupled with insufficient capacity in the impounded supply. Installation of pre-treatment and additional water storage is a mitigation for turbidity events if the impounded supply is unavailable. Extensive investigations have been completed by our external consultant and peer-reviewed to identify which process option would best address the specific turbidity found in the Tamaki River, provide a flow rate to meet town demand, and be installed and commissioned as soon as possible. I want to highlight some of the options that have been explored. One, a leased relocatable membrane plant from Australia. So effectively, we would lease that. It would be flown into Australia, and we would use it for the period that we need it. And then once completed, it would then be sent back. The cost for that was comparable with what we're asking for today in regards of our own permanent, I guess our owned and built one for Dannevirke. We've looked at purchase a relocatable membrane plant. Purchase relocatable membrane plant, one being certified and the other one not certified. A laminar clarifier plant, raw water bladders, and the clip tank storage tanks. In addition to this, DIA, Auckland Water Care, Wellington Water, National Lifelines, NEMA, and New Zealand Water have been contacted to identify any other potential pre-treatment capability options. I think that's important to note. You know, we have reached out wide and far across the country in terms of options around pre-treatment. So it's gone beyond our own consultants, it's gone beyond our peer review, it's gone into other experts within central government and other regional or other councils also. Recommended option today is to purchase a certified relocatable membrane plant at a cost of up to 3.2 million. This cost includes installation and commissioning of the plant, as well as a 10 to 20% contingency in that project. Suppliers have estimated a maximum 24 weeks to manufacture, install, and commissioned, and to ensure that the certified relocatable membrane plant meets design specifications. It has been indicated this could be operational in May 2024. In addition to the pre-treatment plant, it is recommended that a 2,300 cube metre clip tank at a cost of $400,000 be installed in the vicinity of the current treatment plant to further mitigate high turbidity events and, to a lesser extent, periods of low flow. I just briefly want to go back to the first recommendation and remove the S of clip tank and 1.3. That should say clip tank rather than clip tanks. We're only asking or recommending for one. The advantages of the preferred option are a pre-treatment capability owned and operated by council, could be operational within 24 weeks. It mitigates the risk that the New Zealand drinking water standards cannot be met during periods of high turbidity should the impounded supply fail, be dewatered, or be emptied for repairs. Purchase pre-treatment plant can be capitalised as part of the impounded supply asset, and as I mentioned before, rather than a leased option, which would have been likely covered by operational costs. It could be deployed anywhere in the district should an existing plant fail or require additional treatment capability, creating greater resilience. The asset could be sold or leased to another council or entity, which is getting more and more likely. We note that there are some councils that do have similar pre-treatment capability within those councils. And as a side note, we did reach out in terms of trying to lease or have access to that, but unfortunately, they are currently in use. Some disadvantages of the preferred option are the upfront cost to purchase the pre-treatment plant, increased operating costs, costs and logistics of sludge disposal of waste product generated by this process, increased operator input during use, periods of high turbidity, and also the consenting. Land acquisitions and or easements and works compensation. The cost of land acquisition, and really important here, the cost of land acquisition is not included in the above budget and will require a separate council decisions. Land acquisitions are usually funded from the general purpose reserve, which is sufficiently funded for this purpose. There are some risks with the preferred approach. These include the impounded supply may fail before the plant is installed. However, I do want to remind you that we have enhanced monitoring in place to mitigate that. The availability of a suitably qualified and experienced project manager to oversee this project on behalf of council. And I do want to make mention regarding that the current purchase of this would cover a large part of that project management, those project management tasks. So part of the installing would be a project manager from the company that is appointed to install the treatment plant. However, it does still require overview from a project management perspective from council. There is a risk that land acquisition negotiations will not be successfully completed in a timely manner. To mitigate this risk, officers have already commenced engagement with landowners. In any project, there is a tension between time, cost and quality. With the urgency of this project, there is pressure on the time component that may lead to project outcomes not being reached, being the quality and higher costs. To mitigate this, officers have explored options widely across the industry, undertaken early engagement with potential suppliers, had proposals peer reviewed, and utilised a procurement specialist. I'll now move on to the purchase or recommendation to purchase additional treated water storage. It is recommended that a second water tank of 6,000 cubic metres be built adjacent to Reservoir 2 at the top of Blue Gum Lane, in addition to pre-treatment and raw water storage. Additional treated water storage would double the amount of treated storage available from at least 1 to 2 days, based on normal demand. While the impounded supply is unavailable, additional storage is a mitigation for high turbidity events in the Tamaki River, where treatment or pre-treatment cannot produce enough compliant water, low flow events where supply cannot meet demand, and for other unforeseen events that impact water supply infrastructure. While this is an important mitigation for planned or unplanned dewatering of the impounded supply, it will provide ongoing resilience to the water supply by providing treated water storage at the level recommended by industry standards. It will also provide resilience in the event of unforeseen events that impact water supply infrastructure, and to provide redundancy for maintaining the existing tank. 3 quotes have been received to date. The expected period to install this is 6 months. I will touch on the advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of installing additional treated water storage are: provides mitigation to supply risk for turbidity events and to some extent for low flow events. Provides ongoing resilience in accordance with industry standards. Complements the existing tank and allows for maintenance capability and redundancy. The disadvantages of establishing additional treated water storage are the cost. It would require the purchase of additional land, and land acquisitions are usually funded, as I mentioned before, are usually funded from the General Purpose Reserve, which is sufficiently funded for this purpose. The risks of establishing additional treated water storage are also the availability, as I mentioned before, around an experienced project manager to oversee this project on behalf of council. So I'm now going to hand over to Peter Wimsett, and Dave, if Dave's available, who briefly going to talk about the alternative water sources that we're currently investigating. We're not asking for a council decision in relation to the additional water sources, but we think it's really important that an update is provided and to provide a brief on what, if testing comes back as positive, the benefits of that alternative water source. So I'll just hand over to you, Peter, first.
Thank you, Council. Currently about to drill for test bores at the freezing works site that the Alliance owns, just north of Dannyvirk, and as well looking at Laws Road, essentially opposite the current plant site, close to the actual Tamaki River. There are two potentially bore sites there, and one up at the Alliance freezing works. So in terms of where we're at, we've got consent to do the test bores. We've got consent to actually proceed fully with the full bore for the Alliance freezing works, not at the Laws Road yet, because we need to see if that's going to produce the volume that we think we need for that location. The advantage of this is clearly that it gives us a way of mitigating risk, because we're taking from several different locations. And also, instead of just taking from a river source, we're taking from a partly ground source, even though it's deemed to be part of the river flow, because they're only shallow bores. That is one way that we're going to keep the cost down, by going shallow initially. It may come back that the test results say otherwise, but that's where we're at the moment. Dave, do you want to add anything at this?
I think you've covered most of it, Peter. Good morning, everybody. Sorry. It'll all depend on the testing of the flows and the quality from the exploratory bores that we're putting in. So hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll have the exploratory put in and the flows figures back to us, so that we can come back to council with the rest of what's going on. We've been working hand in hand with the Alliance freezing works management, and we have discussed storage on property and other things around how their resilience would actually prosper from what we're doing to how they can grow it into a standalone without drawing any water from the town, but also just being able to mitigate anything they have actually put in place. They have ordered a containerized treatment plant to take care of any high turbidity over the next, so they're just leasing it. So they've leased it for a period of 6 months at present, and that could work out to be as long as they need that, or whether they need to buy that. So they're being positive on their side of the fence, if you want to call it. So we're working closely with them. So yeah, hopefully the draw will be, the bore that we put down at the Alliance will be from the Mangara stream. So it is classed as a surface flow from the river. So we're working through that. We'll work through that with the horizons as we're working along. So yeah, all it boils down to is what flows will come through that exploratory bore before we move further.
To add, in terms of the consent to explore is one thing, the consent to take water is a different thing. So the way that we've been discussing with Horizons Regional Council is that we will maintain only 110 litres per second from all sources. We won't necessarily get any increase, and particularly in the Tamaki, in terms of where we take the water from in low flows. So there's no certainty that we'll be able to take more, just because the river might be flowing better below the confluence of additional tributaries. So that's one advantage of the Laws Road, is that it shouldn't be as difficult in summer to take more water, potentially, but that's not a given. So we'd have to prove that before we could take more than the 54 litres per second that we're currently able to take in low flow. So just wanted to let you know that. We've been working with iwi on these options as well, so that you're aware that they're aware. So, and they understand these factors as well. So there's a little bit of a process that we will have to go through if we are going to get a variation of the water take consent that we will address if we are successful with these bore sites. So we do need to get that flow and prove that the turbidity can also be managed better than just taking directly from the river. Thank you. Power cost, there is a power cost associated with the pumping. So it's always been an advantage for Dannyverk to use the gravity fed system. That will always be the first choice, except when there might be low flows and we can take from elsewhere at a higher volume, or we have high turbid events, which means that it's better to take and pump water from a less affected source. Thank you.
Another thing, Brian, sorry, just with the resilience, or with putting the Tamaki bore in as an extra, the resilience we'll have on the intake line. So if anything goes from the intake, goes wrong with the intake line from the infiltration gallery to the impounded supply, we will then be able to convert straight to the bore water. We won't need to, if there's anything goes wrong, if it blows up or falls apart, or we have a major breakage on that, we won't need to, while the impounded supply is out, especially, we won't need to panic about the being able to feed the town, for argument's sake. But long term, the resilience for the town is 100% fold.
Thank you. And I think that, the point to highlight is that the viability of both these locations to this extent is yet to be 100% proven. And although we are reasonably confident, those results around the quality and flow are still to be provided. If they were good, this work could commence in the new year, subject to council approval and the granting of a resource consent. I do just want to quickly go through the timeline, and then I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to talk about the financial considerations. But some key dates. So we're looking at laboratory testing of the soil samples, which we talked about, the Eastern Embankment. The forecast date for that is the 13th of November this year. The review of those outcomes of those samples against the detailed design will be forecasted as 18th of December. Looking at the clip tank, could be installed and operational by the 12th of January 2024. The Alliance meat work bore completed, and what Dave and Peter just spoke about, subject to resource consent and subject to council approval, could be in place by around the 9th of January 2024. The alternative water source on Laws Road, subject to resource consent, 1 April 2024. Pre-treatment plant, if approved today, we'll be looking at having that installed in May 2024. And the treated water tank installed and operational by 1st of July 2024. So those are currently the indicative timeframes that we are working towards. Through your worship, now I'd ask that Sarah provides an overview of the financial considerations.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, your worship, councillors and the public in the gallery today. What I've done in the financial considerations section is I've given you detail of what budgets have been sought and the date in which we've had them approved. To date, we have total budgets of 1.985 million, of which council has incurred costs totaling 1.688. That was as of last week when the report was written, and there's been no other charges to these to this activity since then. I think if you've been privileged, I will say privileged because it's my area of expertise, to attend a Finance and Performance Committee meeting, you'll be aware that one of the things we talk about in quite a lot of detail is our financial headroom and council's ability to borrow funds within our self-imposed limits. These self-imposed limits, for those that aren't aware, are set as part of the long-term plan. So our self-imposed limits were last set in the 21-31 long-term plan. As a result of what we're seeking for approval today, the borrowing headroom will come down to 13.095 million for the 23-24 financial year. I have also prepared this calculation based off what our year 4 capital projects looked like when we revisited them as part of the 23-24 annual plan. Important to note that year 4 projects are under review consistently throughout our quarterly reporting process, but as well as our long-term plan process moving forward, which we're in the midst of. Factoring that in, our financial headroom for the next financial year will come down to 2.85 million. It's really important to note that our financial headroom is based off our self-imposed borrowing limits. These are set in our Treasury policies, which as part of the long-term plan, Council is currently reviewing. And it's also important to note that our borrowing headroom provides as a risk mitigation for risks that are identified within our risk register. So I've listed them off in the report, but to name a couple being climate change, natural disaster, and any changes that Waka Kotahi funding might have on us. Peter Wimsett briefly touched on it earlier, but just to give a little bit more context, I've got a section in there where I've talked about operational budget implication. We don't know the operating expenditure that is likely to occur as a result of these options yet. However, as we determine which design and firm that up, we will know what that will look like. At the moment, there will likely be savings within our current budgets for the 23-24 financial year, but there will be unbudgeted interest costs associated with these additional borrowings. Important for you to note that any unbudgeted costs over and above any savings will be recovered over subsequent years, like we do as part of our annual plan process.
Thank you, Sarah. The next part of the report does talk about the, I guess, the engagement, whether that be iwi stakeholder and public consultation and engagement. And I will, through your worship, ask if Jess Smith can please cover off this part of the report.
Good morning, everyone. I got that sorted. Yes, I would like to talk about public consultation and engagement going forward. Did you want me to cover the iwi? Oh, so we've just got a small statement in here, but I think there is an update that iwi have been consulted on, have been advised and of the proposed delay that we're recommending to repairing the impounded supply, and I believe they support this recommendation. We've also obviously been continuing to consult with Environment Waikato and Horizons Regional Council around consenting with support from our experts. So in terms of public engagement going forward, Council must always be aware of its obligations under the Local Government Act and our own significance and engagement policy in our decision making. Council's decisions about whether or not to purchase pre-treatment capability and additional storage are significant decisions in the context of our significant engagement policy. So Council is being asked to make these decisions about pre-treatment and storage in isolation, and I think Brian has touched on this, but in isolation from its decision whether or not to repair the impounded supply. So these are the considerations that we're looking at today. They are necessary mitigations for the later decision that Council will then make. The requirement to consult or engage with the community in respect of these two decisions has to be balanced against the urgency with which these decisions must be made. So to support Council's decision making today, officers have obtained legal advice on Council's obligations to consult under its significance and engagement policy and also under the Local Government Act. In respect of these two decisions that we've presented. We've also discussed the decision-making process that we're going through with Audit New Zealand. The legal advice that we have received has reaffirmed our views that council is not subject to a mandatory explicit requirement to consult before making these urgent decisions, as they do not engage Section 97 of the Local Government Act, because there's no significant change to levels of service proposed. And just to make that sound more plain English, that means that we're not proposing to change how we deliver the service. Therefore, we are not automatically required to consult under the special consultative procedure that is provided for in the Act. So we don't have to do it that way. However, it is always our ability, if we're not required to do it in a specified way, to look at our significance and engagement policy and to assess how we will engage with the community under that. We are still subject to mandatory requirements or discretionary considerations, I should say, under other sections under the Local Government Act. But in the circumstances, the legal advice we've received is that we can reasonably exercise our discretion not to consult prior to making these two urgent decisions. Because of the genuine urgency of the two immediate decisions, it can reasonably support our decision not to consult, especially when the options analysis that we've completed as a council indicates these options are necessary regardless of our later decision to repair or not repair the impounded supply. So I guess through the report, we've heard that there are some decisions we need to make urgently to mitigate the failure and also our the risk of failure, I should say, and also our ability to continue to supply Dannevirke residents with safe drinking water. It is considered there's no ability for council to carry out the full public consultation process that we would normally take prior to making these two time-critical decisions. To note, purchasing the pre-treatment system and additional storage provides Dannevirke with resilience, both if the impounded supply is not repaired and if the repairs are completed during the 24-25 construction season. The additional capability will also be a key mitigation should the impounded supply fail or begin to deteriorate, further requiring dewatering before repairs can commence. There has already been some community engagement on the broader matter, so the fact of us making these decisions today will probably not come as a surprise. And we have tried to keep the community informed as to progress throughout the process. This engagement will continue, and officers are preparing a community engagement plan for these decisions as well as the broader program of works, and we will present that to council for their approval. And I've just noted that the engagement plan will include the use of approved methods of public engagement that we have already provided for in our significance and engagement policy. So we will be using the methods that we highlight to community, we will use to speak with them. So it will take several forms to ensure it's accessible to our communities. We will continue to assess our obligation and ability to consult or engage with the community on the substantive decision to repair or not repair, and on the broader program of either remediation or decommissioning works as further information becomes available. If the council does today decide to delay its decision making to a later date, this may present the opportunity for more thorough consultation with the community in the future. It's anticipated that there may be elements in the broader program of works that will be able to be meaningfully consulted on with the community. We've also, obviously, in giving this advice, we've considered the risks that making these two urgent decisions without consultation effectively binds council to the particular larger program of works. But it's considered that we can make these decisions in isolation from the substantive decisions because the resilience provided by pre-treatment and additional storage is a mitigation for all potential options. It's the assessment of the two urgent decisions has been completed in isolation from considering the specific details of the broader program. So in the circumstances in which the urgent decisions are required, it's recommended that council does proceed to make those necessary decisions as it's legally able to, and that the later decisions be reassessed when details of them become known against Part 6A of the Local Government Act. So that's our decision-making requirements.
Thank you, Jess. Briefly, you'll note that there's not a heading for risk, and we have reported the risk registers through other committees. However, I will ask through your worship if Stephen can provide an overview how we've addressed risk within this report.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, everyone. How we decided to address risks through this report was to weave it into all of the sections to ensure that risk was being considered through every part of the report rather than considering it as a separate item on its own. So that's how we've structured it through here. And primarily, the risk around the failure of the impounded supply has come from analysis done by Tonkin and Taylor, which was presented to Council in September 2022, which stated that it provided a postulated basis for failure of the impounded supply and 7-step process that Tonkin and Taylor believed would lead to failure of the dam. And it also indicated in that report that 3 of the 7 steps had almost certainly occurred, and that there was potentially it was some likelihood that a further 1 or 2 steps had occurred. And that's why we've, as to give some background, that's why we've gone down the track of the mitigations that we've had to date. So I'll just go through those. So in terms of the, and as it's come through the report, the terms of reducing the likelihood that the impounded supply will fail or deteriorate further, requiring it to be dewatered. The focus there has been firstly on the temporary repairs that have been completed earlier this year to stabilise the situation. The enhanced monitoring program that we have in place and that we're continuing to develop and enhance. The emergency response plan, which is where our monitoring tells us that something has changed or deteriorated. We have a plan of action to stop the deterioration, and it gives us an ability to continue to maintain the impounded supply. And the other is the lowering of the level of water in the impounded supply, which, as Brian mentioned, reduces the pressure on the system, but also reduces the safety risk if the impounded supply failed. So those are the actions that we're taking to reduce the likelihood that the dam fails, and that's woven through the report as well. Just in terms of the consequences of the failure, I've mentioned that there's safety risk in terms of water exiting the dam in an uncontrolled manner. And I've talked about how we've reduced the level. But the other risk is to the supply of water to the Dannevirke community, and the impounded supply is there to protect that supply during periods of high turbidity in the Tamaki River, during periods of low flow, which impacts our ability to meet demand based on our consent conditions, and also for other things that can go wrong, such as an earthquake impacting our pipe network or other failures of our infrastructure. So keeping the impounded supply maintained in its current state and doing the things to reduce the consequences of those. So that's where we talk about pre-treatment and additional storage. They're reducing the consequences to the community by, if the impounded supply does fail or need to be dewatered, or we progress with the repairs, that we've got those contingencies in place that the impounded supply would normally provide for. And I'm hoping that in that summary, I've summarised what has been woven through the report.
Thank you, Stephen. Now we're getting towards the back end of this report now, and through your worship, I will ask Hamish, our new Group Manager Infrastructure, to talk a bit about the future decisions, the conclusions, and how we'll address those questions that we've received.
Thank you, Brian. Good morning, Your Worship, councillors, staff and members of public. Well, just very quickly, so in conclusion, since the repairs were done in June, we've been focusing on getting a good solid plan for construction for this season. Unfortunately, due to those delays, we aren't able to do it in a timely manner, and it puts more risk in place. Unfortunately, the risk that the impounded supply could fail is still in place. So the options that we put forward to you today will help mitigate that and buy us the time we need to get the answers right. So we will be bringing some future decisions back to council. So we'll have a recommendation on the future of the impounded supply. We'll have one on the approval to purchase additional land, want to proceed with the installation of the alternative water source for the Alliance Meatworks, and lastly, one for the approval to proceed with the installation of the alternative water source for Dannyverk in terms of the 2 bores at Laws Road. So, with Roger away as a manager of Three Waters, he would generally answer the questions on the day, but we have received some questions in advance to give us the opportunity to, I guess, answer them with his input. So we will work through them. There are a few, and we have answered some of them throughout the presentation, so I'll skim over those pretty quickly, but for transparency, we'll just explain what the questions were and talk through them. So the first question was a question around the imminent failure of the dam and how rapidly it's deteriorating. And within the paper, there was conflicting options there. Steve has talked about the risk of the impounded supply since then. So I think that risk has been talked through. There was a question about whether pre-treatment being in place prior to dewatering was identified as a risk at the start of the project. I believe Stephen's answered that one as well. However, just to clarify, it was a risk at the start. We just didn't have a solution until reasonably recently. We've been optioneering and figuring out the best way to deal with that. The next question was we talk about the impounded supply providing a raw water buffer for times of low flows and high turbidity events. My understanding is that we also use it when the town either draws more than our consent or our inability to draw the maximum water allows from our consent. So as Peter mentioned earlier, we have a global consent of around 110 litres per second. That's across the board. So in times of low flows, we're restricted to 54. So the impoundment has been used as the buffer in the past, hence the suggestion to have some additional clip tanks and such to provide some buffers during those times. There was a question around the results of the gallery inspection on the 15th of September. The cameras went down and had another look. The repairs are holding well. There was some minor changes to a couple of locations, but nothing of serious concern to those operators. And we're quite comfortable that the deterioration is steady at this stage. It's not increasing in any great rate of knots. So we'll be fairly comfortable at this stage. We had a question around whether we've had any advice from Taumata Arawai around the regulatory implications of using boil water notices. We haven't had any specific advice. However, our consenting manager has said that Taumata Arawai are unlikely to support taking a risk with non-compliant turbid water from either the river or impound supply consistently for 3 months. Turbidity above 5 NTU creates a problem with the operation of disinfection. There would need to be a reliable filtration barrier in place to send compliant water to the UV reactor and then to be chlorinated. The Dannyverk plant has 2 multimedia filters, which are unlikely to be able to cope with lots of turbidity from the river should this occur with a week of bad weather. So boil water notices are a last resort, emergency only, when treatment capacity and barriers are not sufficiently in place. a boil water notice ongoing for 3 months would likely be a no from Taumata Arawai. It would not be a good look. So we had 4 questions around the clip tanks. So we were asked whether it was just one clip tank, and yes, it is. So we're still in the optioneering phase where we could purchase one for $400,000 ish and get it installed. So that's sort of the rough order costs. But we do also have one that we may be able to repurpose from elsewhere that we already currently own, and of course the cost for that would be significantly less. It would just be the costs of moving and installation. So we're thinking around 150. So there was a question around whether we'd need the full 400. We perhaps wouldn't if that was going to be a viable option, and we're still working through that at the moment. We had a question around whether the clip tank would be the one that we own would be loaned to the Alliance Meatworks. At this stage, we're looking for them to purchase their own one as part of that project, and whether we can repurpose the clip tanks once this project's completed. And yes, that is the case. We can move them sort of where the need is to a cost. I think the cost of moving is around $100,000 to $150,000 depending on the location. We had a question around the 6 megalitre storage and whether that cost of $2.5 million included everything. And yes, that's including the earthworks installation and a contingency in there. We had a question around when do we expect the peer review parties to come to an agreement, and we're continuing to put pressure on them. We can't say exactly when they're going to agree to it, but we'd like to think within the next couple of weeks they will have ironed out the final things. They're still waiting on the geotechnical test results to confirm some of the decision making in the peer reviews. So we're doing the best there. We had a question around the earthworks contractor that was mentioned earlier in the paper, and whether that's our preferred supplier. And just for clarity, that contractor was brought in to help with the design process to help tease out the requirements of earthworks. It was in no means a commitment to that contractor. We'd be going through a standard procurement process once we have a design and we could put out to market. We have had some pretty good interest in that project from the contractors themselves. I think 5 or 6 contractors have been out on site and had a look with Roger. So that's good. We'll have some competition there. We had a question around the program manager from Damwatch. So Alexi from Damwatch, who's hiding in the corner over there, she's been actively involved in making sure all the steps in the project are well lined up and providing guidance to Roger and the wider team to make sure that everything's working there, and actively involved. The next steps, if locating an alternative water source if Laws Road is unsuccessful. So I think we will continue to have a look at how we can build resilience in that system, and whether we need to do further test bores elsewhere would be a decision for the future after we get the results, I would say. We had a question around whether extraordinary users will be expected to restrict their use of the water. We did mention it in section 4.12.2 of the paper, but also where it mentions we'll be doing metering and doing an education campaign to work with those people to reduce the usage and to make them a little bit more conscious of what they're using and when. We had a question around the operational capacity of the pumps to draw at low levels. So we've had a peer review done on that process. Unfortunately, we can't physically test it until we actually drop the water down to that level. So while it works in theory, we're yet to physically test it, but the process has been peer reviewed. I guess a bit like your airbags in your car, you just presume that they work, and you trust that the people that put them there have thought it through. We're seeking approval for the funding of an ROV, so the remote operated vehicle for the inspections. At this stage, we're not requesting funding for it. We're looking to use existing budgets and the operational cost. We already have somebody in-house who works in that sort of space who can take that up as well. We had a question around the resourcing required for the increased operator input. So in general terms, when there's an event that has high turbidity, our operators will go up and make changes to the way the plant's operating. So move the water flows from the impounded, from the river to the impounded supply and do that mixing and all that sort of thing. So they'll be mitigating that anyway, so that then when the pre-treatment comes in place, they'd just be adding that as another tool in their toolkit. So they'd be going up and make changes to the plant. It's also one of the things that we'd ask the designer to look at as to how they can manage it and how that works. We had a question around our other towns' water supplies. We'd just quite like to defer that question to another time, if that's all right. That's around whether we're meeting the industry standards. We didn't have that information to hand. Sarah, we had a question around the general purpose reserve.
Hamish, the balance of the general purpose reserve factoring in the Woodville wastewater consent land and the Ikitahuna wastewater consent land is 1.6 million, of which I just want to identify 490,000 is earmarked or ring fenced around Woodville as a result of how those funds came to be in the general purpose reserves. So the balance is 1.148 million after we factor in the ring fenced.
Thank you. So next we had 3 questions on the alternate water sources. We were asked how likely do we believe the success of finding an alternative water source would be. They wanted some clarity around the water being drawn from the Tamaki River and whether further funding requests would be brought back to council, and I believe Peter's talked that through earlier. We had a question around when the review of the capital projects in year 4 will be carried out. So we're going to be doing a review for the quarterly report of the current projects, and then we'll be reviewing the grand total as part of the LTP process. We had a question around the analysis of high turbidity events. I'd like to pass that one to Stephen. Good.
Thanks, Hamish. Yeah, so this question is around analysis of high turbidity events that occur on the Tamaki River and how that may look in the future. So to help inform how that might look in the future, we looked into the past and we commissioned consultant GHD to review high turbidity events on the Tamaki River. And they've provided a report on those. Just some caveats around that, that their report relies on data for the last 4 years and doesn't go back any further than that. So it's a reasonably short time frame, and that we were in a La Nina weather pattern during that period. It's also the data is not wholly complete or fully audited, so there is potential that some of the information is incomplete. And the other thing is it talks, we set a threshold of the 10 NTU, which is sort of the threshold that the Dannevirke water treatment plant can work at in terms of turbidity. However, from an operational point of view, our water treatment plant operators are conservative, and so they would be managing their plants in a way that may mean that they decide that they need to take water from the impounded supply at a lower than 10 NTU on the basis that they're expecting it to rise above. So it doesn't take into account operational requirements. So just those caveats before I start. So in summary, in the report, it says that turbidity events of greater than 10 NTU and are common or frequent events that occur on the Tamaki River, but are typically short in duration. Longer duration events do occur from time to time, but can be of multiple days in duration and do not appear to exhibit any particular seasonality, i.e. they can occur at any time of year. And just to give you an example of how common or frequent they're talking about, there were in the period 2018 to 2021, there was one event. But since then, the number of events has increased significantly since the spring autumn of 2021-22. So there was one event during that 6-month period. The following 6 months, there were 4 events. The following 6 months, there were 7 events, and the next, there were 6 events. And just in terms of total days, that ranged from anywhere between just a period of hours to the longest period being 26 days. So I guess that reaffirms that it's a highly variable event looking at the previous 4 years, and I would say makes it very difficult to predict with any accuracy how often that may occur in the future. And just for completeness, their report also went into low flow events, and the analysis indicated that low flow events below consent conditions appear to be rare and historically have only occurred once, and that was during the 2019-2020 drought period over the 10 years to analyse. So I would say for low flow, it's less likely, but the period of time is likely to be longer when they do occur.
Great, thank you for that. So our next question was around the estimated residual value of the purchased pre-treatment plant. So the rough estimated life of this type of kit is about 20 years of continuous use. And every 7 years you'd replace the filters. So if it was depreciated over 20 years, you know, would after a year would have 19/20 sort of left. But I'm guessing we won't actually be using it continuously. We'll be using it in these high turbidity events, so we'll get quite a fair amount of life after it. There's not a huge resale market for this type of gear, so I couldn't jump on Trade Me and find a number for you. I'm sorry. Next question is around the estimated operating costs for this piece of gear. I think we'll be figuring that out as part of the design. It will be used sporadically for these events, so that the cost won't be huge. It'll just be the power and some additional materials at those sorts of events. We had a question around the risks around being able to recruit suitably qualified and experienced project management staff. As mentioned earlier, part of the operational delivery will be done by those suppliers and the consultants, so that will be helpful. However, we're setting up 2 groups within this set of projects. One is a project steering group, so that's a group looking at the high level project, and that will include governance. And the other one is project operating group. Working group, thanks, Brian. So that they'll be the ones making the decisions on the ground, making sure that the contractors are doing the right thing and such. So we'd like an awful lot of oversight of this project to make sure that it does go ahead the way we intend it to. The next question was around whether the last 3 questions are around purchase of land. As I mentioned earlier, we will be bringing back that decision to council. We will need extra land for these projects, but we have been in negotiations with landowners. We do have the Public Works Act as the very, very last resort, but in fact, we like to negotiate and talk with people first, and that's generally our approach. So that's the end of the questions that came in prior to the meeting. I guess happy to open it up to the floor for any further questions.
Thanks for that, and very thorough. Just so for people's awareness and the public, that wouldn't be usual to have that many questions. It was in Roger's absence that we just wanted him to give that opportunity. The only other comment that I'd make, and thanks for that report, Stephen, on the turbidity, is the last boiled water notice that was issued in Dannevirke, the turbidity was in excess of 100, which means it can't be measured. So that's the extent that we can get. So that was the last boiled water notice, just to give some context to that. Right, Councillor Johns, you're first on my list.
Thanks, Worship. Yeah, there's a lot to go through here. probably several comments, but I may leave some for others. But I'd made a note here as to what records there were as to the turbidity events. Stephen, you've given me those, but what months do they cover? Are they the December to March period? And I know last year, of course, we had a very wet summer, which probably skew the figures somewhat. But were they in that period of the summer period?
What GHD did in their analysis is they tried to see if there was a seasonal trend. So they broke the analysis down into summer, autumn, and winter, spring, into 6 months blocks. And what their conclusion was is that there was no pattern as to whether turbidity events would occur during summer, summer, autumn period or winter, spring period. They weren't able to draw a conclusion that one or other was more likely.
The regulator in Te Mata Arawai, has he or she, not sure, brought any case against the council for issues of turbidity in water or drinking boil water notices?
Through you, Mayor Tracy, not that I'm aware of, but we would have to go and check with them. They're a reasonably new regulator, but we could find some history on that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, not since Te Mata Arawai has been around. I think that's been maybe 2 years now. No, nothing.
Yes, my thinking is it worth the risk? Maybe 1 or 2 occasions where we put out boil water notices over that 3 or 4 month period in the summer. What's it going to cost us relative to spending $3.25 million?
Through your worship, I think we touched on that before with the statement made by our compliance team leader. Effectively, you don't want to be boil water notices to be a regular occurrence, because what happens is that community get complacent with them, and then the risk is that someone does get sick. And that's certainly something that myself as the chief executive does not want happening in the community. And as mentioned within that statement, boil water notices should only be used in an emergency event.
Following up, Councillor Johns, it also imposes a high risk on businesses to be able to guarantee their supply and their customers and safety, as well as schools, rest homes, and has huge implications for the Alliance Meatworks, which wouldn't be, if they didn't have their full supply, would stop their operation.
That's fine in theory, but we know if it's only turbidity, it's not E. coli or anything like that, so it's not likely to affect businesses. But I'll just ask a question. It's a lot of money to spend for a short period of time, and
I'll let Hamish have a comment and then I'll talk.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. I'd just like to clarify. So the reason turbidity is one of the symptoms. When there's a high turbidity event, the treatment plant can't treat the water properly, so all the other bugs won't get treated. So it's not just the look or the smell or the taste. It's a bigger problem than.
Assuming we get sufficient water out of the bores, to what extent are we likely to have turbidity issues?
Yes, Councillor Johns, that would depend on the amount of water that we were able to take from those bores and whether that would be able to supply the town. We don't know that information yet.
I'm aware of that, but one assumes that the water we take from the bores is not turbid to anywhere near the extent that we're talking about in the records. It's effectively filtered water through shingle and what have you. And we have no records as to, or any history with that. But we're going to spend a lot of money putting down bores, and obviously there's a confidence level there that's such that we've decided to go ahead with it. So let's assume we get water out of those bores that will suffice, given we've got a clip tank for additional storage. Have you done the figures, or have you looked at those options? Because I do realise that you're in a position where you have to give an opinion that covers everything, belt and braces. To hell with the money. Your personal reputations are on the line as much as anything else. And we need to take that into consideration.
Through your worship, there's a couple of things. One of the performance objectives was around value to the ratepayer. So it is that we do take that into consideration within the planning. We could come here with the gold star 35-20, so we definitely take that into account when we present options. In terms of turbidity, you got to remember that the current plant can only treat 10 up to 10 NTU, which is, when you compare it to when we had a boil water notice, was over 100, so 10 times turbidity. So I prepared to make the assumption that any, sort of weather events would still result in higher than normal turbidity wherever we take it from. And we can't, be 100% sure of that, because for one, you need an event, and two, you need to be testing it at the time. So, yeah, I think important thing here to note is 10 NTU, and if we're continually treating at 10 NTU, that will place our current treatment plant under quite a lot of pressure as well. You don't want to be treating higher than normal levels of turbidity all the time as well. So I'm reasonably confident that wherever we draw water from would still be higher than 10. May not be 100, maybe 70, 60, 70. That's still too high for our plant.
I'll move to Councillor Ward's, followed by Councillor Gilmore.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I think we're going to be debating a lot of the whats, the wheres, and the whens. I get the why. One thing that hasn't come through in this report and the modelling that I've seen, certainly from a financial perspective, and it'll be no surprise to my colleagues that I'll be asking questions regarding that. I'm really unclear as to what the impact long term for our community will be. We've used words like headroom, which to me is having some spare gas in your tank for what might happen in the future for this community. Now, there's an analysis cut here that if we agree to what's presented here today, we're going to lose 5 million, just like that, out of what we call our headroom. I appreciate that there's a lot of word about it'll be a capital expense, but there's a number of unknowns here that will A, impact still on our capital, but B, on our operational. Now that comes at a long-term cost to our community, and that's reflected in our rates. So I'm asking a question I'm not sure could be answered, but I want to try and understand, if we make this decision today, what liability is our community looking forward to for the next 10, 20 years in terms of the impact on their rates? Now, but the additional concern I have with this is a decision like this will have implications on what we can't do or would even like to do for our community in the next 10 years. And I think we need to think about the ramifications of that. We need to manage the community's expectations around, if we do this, to give Dannyvirk water, what that means for our community into the next 10 years is we won't be able to do other things. And I think we probably need to tease that out while we consider the detail of the why that is comprehensively covered. So not seeking any particular answers. I'm sure the financial modelling will get done, but I'm just expressing the implications long term, the liability that our community will have to pay for, and balance that with obviously the absolute need to do something. Thank you, Your Worship.
Brian, and then I think, Sarah, if you can touch on that, because that was raised in one of the questions around capital projects and making sure that people understand the long term of that capital expenditure and the impact. But I think also, Steve, that's why I talked about a little bit about the risk to businesses. There's actually also the reputation and what happens if we do have those events and go into those long periods of board water notices. So if I go, Brian, for a comment, then Sarah and Steve.
Thank you, Your Worship. It is a good question, and it's something that, around this table you need to really give due consideration in terms of, being prudent financially. In terms of the raising debt, our view is that this will be intergenerational debt. There'll be people that will be using the system in terms of the water when we're all gone, and that has to be a focus of the decision we make today. So it's not just repairing it for the people of today for Dannyburg, it is also repairing it for the future generation. So that burden and that liability should be shared, in my view. But looking at, capitalising around that, the 5.5 million, obviously we've got to pay that back, and interest gets put on that. However, in saying that, it's not, and you know this, but just in terms of the public, it's not the same as an operational cost in terms of debt funding. So if something was 5.5 million, that's not all of a sudden 20% rates. I'd probably need Sarah or Raj to work out roughly what that would cost a ratepayers over 25 years. I think, we're probably looking at more around the 1% rates than over 20-year period than anything sufficiently more. But don't quote, well, you can quote me on that, but would need obviously to get a bit more financial analysis around it. Yeah.
Just to further add on to Brian's comments, I mentioned we have our self-imposed borrowing limits, which are set as part of the long-term plan. So the headroom that we've discussed is based on the 21-31 long-term plan. Obviously, our circumstances have changed significantly since the 21-31 long-term plan. I mean, you only need to look in your community, the interest rates that our community are facing personally. So one of our borrowing factors is the interest rate and factoring that in. So we have had previous discussions in long-term plan workshops around proposals to our limits. Obviously, these were all pre new government coming on board, so we will need to revisit those policies that we were looking to implement as part of this long-term plan. But to go to our maximum debt limit that LGFA allow us, we would have the ability to borrow 27 million. But as I've mentioned in our Finance and Performance Committee meetings, this is one of the things that does keep me up at night, is our ability to borrow within our headroom. So as numbers change, I've got quite a few little models that I've got going on that I can just quickly populate and update. So it's something that we're monitoring quite in depth. With regards to the rates impact, I'm going to ask Raj to step in and answer that if he has any further comment. His expertise.
Thank you, Your Worship. Morning, councillors. It's been answered. Sarah's answered the questions, but I just want to talk a little bit more about. I think the word Councillor Sharon uses, liability. It's a little bit broader than that. Whenever council invest, whether you purchase an asset or you invest in resources, you're always taking on either a short-term or longer-term liability, and may not be the right word to use. I would say a commitment for a cost element to it. So in terms of pre-treatment, the commitment basically will be maintaining that asset to ensure that it's effectively renewed, maintained, and operational cost to it. In terms of rates impact, that we can't look at it in isolation. And it's very difficult for me to say that just for this project, that's what the rate impact is going to be. You got to look at it holistically. I would refer council to the financial strategy that we implement that gives us tools within that to manage the rates impact on our ratepayers. So one of the tools is we set a rate ceiling to say that, in a financial strategy, we say it's going to be bill plus 3+2, for an example. So that will allow us actually to limit the rates impact on the ratepayers by saying that if we take on this project, you're going to incur costs. Then we have an ability to look at all the other services to see where we could actually reduce the cost so that we could fit within the rates increase that is acceptable to us as governors, and also that is affordable to the community. So there's ability for us to look at that. So I think we got to take that approach in terms of looking at the rates impact rather than looking at an isolation to say that just this one project is going to cost you that much. It's quite difficult for us right now to say too, because there's a lot of unknowns for us in this process, and this is just a decision right now in terms of two decisions. We still have further decisions regards to whether we repair. So I think we got to look at holistically, but I think the assurance I guess we could give the community is that we will, as part of the planning process, and LTP are looking at rates increases, rates affordability. So if this particular project has got an impact on rates, then looking at the rates affordability cap or limit, we then need to look at other services and how we manage it.
Thanks, Raj. Steve, was in some of the risk, was any of that considered around risk to the community in regards to businesses, rest homes, education, impacts to those? I know when we've had boil water notices in the past, we do have plans rolled out for that, but any further considerations there?
Me, Tracy. I think when I look at the potential for boil water notices, if I start at council's strategic objective around water, that's in the long-term plan, which is to ensure a reliable supply of safe drinking water to our communities. So a boil water notice is a mitigation for the fact that we're providing water that potentially isn't safe for the community to use as drinking water. So, and as mentioned, it's an emergency provision or a last resort provision, and it's asking the community to take steps to protect themselves by, for example, boiling the water. And so the impact is most for the most vulnerable, who might not be in a position to do that well or to know to do that. And it's also for our businesses who would be asked to provide their own water from an alternate supply. So those and so the impacts are then about people's safety. And also, I think you're right about a loss of confidence in council because of the inability to meet our objective to provide safe water. And also, so that's an impact on business continuity for our commercial sector as well. I think, is that frame that?
Thanks for that, Steve. And the council awards, I think in my notes, I put refer to finance and performance, because not understanding those operational costs does concern me, because that's a direct impact to rates as well, but we just don't have that information. So, okay. Right, Councillor Gilmore.
Thanks very much, Your Worship. I have a lot of sympathy with Councillor Johns' comments and Councillor Ward's comments, and I guess what I've been reflecting on, especially talking about some of the intergenerational burden that this may have, is I think here we all consider that really, really strongly. And it's weighing up whether quite a large expenditure for 1 year's gain is worth that intergenerational burden coming through. You know, a very big investment that has to be made potentially that may not need to be used or may not need to be used often. We might actually get through a season heading into an El Nino weather pattern where we aren't going to need it, where we have the tanks put in place. So I'm just talking about the treatment plant in particular, which will give us that couple of days buffer, hopefully for turbidity to reduce. I guess what I'm really sort of weighing up in my mind is thinking about the burden that ratepayers might have to face with very occasional boil water notices, balanced with the burden that ratepayers will have to pay for paying for it, because this isn't just coming out of a magical pot of money. This is going to have to be raised as debt, and then it's going to have to be rated for. So the impact on rate side was certainly a question that I had as well. And I do reflect that I don't live in Dannevirke, and I also strongly believe that council does need to be providing a safe water source for people. But because there's no consultation piece in that, and I understand the reasons why, and I think that's been explained incredibly well, I don't know where ratepayers in Dannevirke necessarily will sit on the burden of having to do a couple of boil water notices, but then weighing that up with the potential, as you mentioned, which is horrifying, of a 26-day long event. So those are my comments, Mayor Tracy.
Executive to answer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we've got to be a little bit careful here when we start making sort of comments around a couple of boil water notices. It could be 30 boil water notices as well. So I think, you know, we're, you know, and in a lot of ways you've got to plan, you know, for the worst and hope for the best. And I'd be, you know, really concerned if we were, you know, I'd be relieved if we didn't put in and we didn't get any boil water notices. That would be great. But I think a lot of us would be having some sleepless nights every time that it rained, knowing that 2 days of rain and we drop over to 12 NTU, which doesn't take a lot under our current river, that a boil water notice. And it goes back to my comment earlier before, the more boil water notices or the risk of more boil water notices that you issue, complacency will creep in. I think the other factor here to remember is that, you know, currently, even without the water, without our impounded supply leaking or deteriorating, it's not resilient. We believe that any work that we do now and into the future will build and further resilience to further protect the community. And, you know, once again, the water treatment plant only can function to 10 NTU. So even though we may have the impounded supply, we may also have occasions where the impounded supply does drop and high turbidity levels. So we are, whatever we do now and decide on, it will build resilience. And something else we've got to factor in is, you know, there potentially could be, well, actually there will be growth in terms of Dannevirke and the use of our impounded supply. And we don't know how quickly that growth will come, but our current, you know, we've made some predictions around that, and we've got to start planning for the future as well. And any decision we make today will, I believe, will benefit our future generations. And it might be that we go through this summer or this period not requiring to use the treatment plant, but I still think there's a necessity there to continue to build in resilience to not only for us to today, but for our future generations.
Councillor Gilmore, just for supplementary, Rider.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you to the Chief Executive, Brian, thank you very much for the info, and perhaps it might be helpful to get a bit more clarification. And it was a question that I'd sort of emailed through, because that is a big part of us weighing up what could be quite an important decision. So when I looked at that, and when we got some of the information on how often high turbidity events come up, it seemed to me that the majority of those were very short duration, where part of the recommendation we have is putting in tanks, which I would hope would, or the clip tank, which I would hope would mitigate some of that. So from what I've heard from you now, it seems like that risk is perhaps higher than what I've understood it to be. So could we get a little bit more information on, based off historic factors, how often would it be likely that we would have high turbidity events that would necessitate, with the tanks being in place, would necessitate boil water notices as a sort of a medium and a worst case scenario, because I think we have to base our decisions off that.
Your worship, and I might need to go to Steve, who has some of that data around it. Just remember that the tanks have 1 days, that the storage capacity of the clip tanks is significantly less than the impounded supply. And whenever a bore water notice is issued, there must be 3 clear days. So the rivers do take a while to drop in terms of turbidity. So any bore water notice, from my view, would be probably looking at anywhere from 3 to 10 days effectively would be for the period of a bore water notice. Unlikely to be 3 if you need 3 clear days as well.
What you're saying here, Brian. So the clip tank that we're asking for is 2,000 cubic meters, which is equivalent to around half a day's supply. But there would be operational capacity depending on how the river was performing. To stretch that out by doing some water blending and so forth. There's lots of operational sort of intricacies around this, but also I agree completely around the timeframes that if we are in a position where water slips into the non-compliant zone, we are no matter if that even happens for a brief period, we are 3 days to recover that back for the bore water notice coming off. And just referring back to the last time this occurred in Dannevirke, where we had a position that we couldn't access water in the impounded supply, and we had a high turbidity event in the Tamaki River in 2021. I think we ended up with a notice lasting eight days for that event. And so my expectation would be that that's the sort of period that you would be looking for any time that this occurred.
I'll just go in order if I can. I've got Councillor Sutherland, Councillor Long, and Councillor Franklin.
Tracy and Brian, just going from the back forward, really. I think we're long overdue to approve another source of treated water supply. I think irrespective of every other discussion that's been looming for some years now, and I think that's really, really important to get on with that. The one there now is aging, and there's some, there's going to be some. It won't get any better with that, so I think that's a critical factor. The clip tank that we're going to put in the untreated water supply, I think I agree. Stephen's quite correct. That's not the saviour. That's only half a day or so of water we can keep in there. Brian touched on growth too. The current treatment plant has got a maximum, can treat about 80 litres a second of water. That's in a good day. That's when everything's perfect. At the moment, Dannevirke's using maybe 65 to 70 litres per second of water on average. Growth could bring that over the next couple of years over 80. So the treatment plant is pretty much, it's tottering on its maximum ability now really, that's with perfect water. Up until our last infrastructure meeting, the Tamaki River had been in high flows for almost a year from the information we got. Not all those were over 10 NTUs, but there was a long time. So the risk factors was there. And I guess where the councils are weighing up, should we spend 3.2 million or take the punt? The take the punt is quite high risk to me. I think if we get into higher turbidity, that 80 litres a second the treatment plant can do drops down significantly. It drops down well under what we can supply. So it's, the treatment plant's got to come right back, and I don't know the exact amount, but it might drop back by 2/3. And so we are at very, very high risk of supply to Dannevirke and I guess we're weighing up the high risk against the 3.2 million to me. And Brian did make the comment that there was no offence notices dropped into the tin by Te Mata Arawai, but that South Island Council that ended up with a long period of board water notices recently, wasn't it? There were certainly threats made, and they did receive warnings about that, and the fines and there's quite serious consequences in monetary and other issues for councils if we get into that. And that's something that makes me pretty uneasy. I guess I'm getting around to the fact of supporting it really, but Sharon touched on the funding, and I do know at our infrastructure meeting and previous financial meetings, just this project, which could be significant if we decide to fix the dam, we could be up into the 20 millions, and other aspects of our wastewater. I think funding for Tararua District is something we really need to look at. At the last infrastructure meeting, Tonkin and Taylor had lifted their views to this as a 100-year project, and we did question that. But I think we've got to look at this project as a 50-year project. If we're going to go ahead with the dam, we've got to think 50 years, we don't want to be 11 years where we are now, but 50 years is the goal. And maybe we have to seriously look at funding this infrastructure over a longer period too. The funding we have talked about, and it worries us how much debt and the headroom, but I do think funding's significant and important, and to think of ways of mitigating that cost to ratepayers, on the other hand. But it's a balance really, isn't it? Again, cost and risk. But I do take Brian's point. I mean, if we go ahead with a relocatable or a transferable plant, I sort of look positively out. This could cost us expensively right now, but I don't think I think this could be an asset for our region, whatever region we end up with the three waters, whatever that may end up being. It could be quite a valuable resource for Tararua, or maybe the Horizons region if we were involved in that. So I think there is risk, but there's also, there's ways out, I think, actually myself. So just quick summation for me.
Thanks, Councillor Sutherland. And I think you raised some good key facts there. And I think I'd like to ask the communications team through Chief Executive, if we can, just to actually understand that, this is what the storage means, this is what Dannevirke means. Just having that in front of you and would help and make it clear for the public as well. So that's perhaps something we can work on getting together. Councillor Long.
To you, Mayor Tracy. Kerry's exactly 100% correct. Whatever decision we make today, there's a risk either way. My concerns are the ability for the ratepayers to pay this money back. And we know there's a lot more to go before this. This isn't solving the issue of the impounded supply. So my understanding is it's a 6-month window to dewater the impounded supply and get it back going. So roughly we're spending this sort of money today on 6 months. We know some of the equipment can be used afterwards. Now, I had the 3 previous councillors before Kerry. I agree 100% with what you're saying. With the water at the moment, if we take 20% out already from Alliance, and then we also look at 2 bores, which is better water with less turbidity, and We don't know the figure, what that is. We've already reduced our requirements in the turbidity standard in that high rainfall event in the Tamaki already. We're mitigating some of it. And so we have to make a decision there if we're prepared to take that risk or not of doing what's recommended today. So that's going to be the question for the councillors here. Yep. I'm all for putting another clip tank or 2 clip tanks there. And is that on existing land that's owned by the council? No, so that's again more purchase of land. Yep. So yeah, so when you're talking 400,000 for a clip tank, it could be considerably more to put it on the ground. Yeah. So think.
Just move, oh, sorry, to the chief executive, then yourself, and then I just want a clarification.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just clarification that what we're proposing is the delay of the impounded dewatering. So the pound won't be dewatered over the next 6-month period. It'll be at this point, more than likely, if this was the decision of council, November 2024. So we would have to go from basically over the summer and winter, period without any further pretreatment. If the balls and the meatworks did come off, as I mentioned before, it's might reduce the turbidity, but I doubt it will reduce it below 10 NTU.
I was just going to say, the clip tank land that we would look to purchase would be wrapped up into the negotiations that we're already having with landowners up at the impounded supply site. So that has already been contemplated as part of the parcel that we were to take. So there shouldn't be an additional, yeah.
Thank you. Just to expand what we're meaning there, we have to do land acquisition anyway because of the dam regulations, just more for the sort of publics. So that has to happen regardless, just for further clarification.
I just wanted to clarify, it's been discussed, brought up a couple of times around the alliance and the 20%. My understanding with the bores, even if they are successful, and can I just look to Dave for some clarification, that won't complete, is that still being envisaged that will completely supply the alliance or just one part of the operation?
Worship, the thought, well, the concept of is that they would totally be feeding off the Mandurah stream. But what the difference is the global consent for the district, so the 110 litres, that part, say that's 20 litres a second, there's 90 for the rest. So if we take the bore at the Tamaki and the infiltration gallery, we have got 90 left, or if they only use 10, got 100 left. So it's working that consent for the whole total feeding of the Denny, the township. So yeah, whichever way you do it.
Thanks for that clarification, Brian.
Just further to what Dave said, but also if we do go into low flows, etc., they may not be able to draw the requirements of what they need within that level. So they potentially could then tap back into supplement it from the town system.
Okay, Councillor Franklin.
Thank you, Your Worship. We can sit here and talk about this all day. However, I personally believe we don't have a choice in this matter. You know, given we are constantly being told about climate change, we are seeing it. Look what's going on up north at the moment. So taking statistical data from history isn't always going to give us a true picture of what the future holds for this particular community and the risk involved if we don't do something in the interim. the mention of the impact of boiled water notices, the first thing I think of, and with absolute sympathy, is the hospitality industry, because they would have to close. Every single hospitality business would not be able to open. You cannot function in a cafe and a boiled water notice is impossible. So you've got whole sectors of the community that be impacted, could be up to 8 days at a time, because we just don't know. And I just don't think we can afford to take the risk. And I agree fully with what Kerry said about spreading this over a 50-year period, not in the short interim. We have discussed these opportunities around this table. We only have one chance to get this right. We don't have a crystal ball. We can't predict what the future holds. And I personally don't think we can afford to take the risk for our communities.
Thanks, Councillor Franklin, and thanks for sharing the impact to the hospitality industry. I know with a school, the minute that you do that, they can't guarantee that those children have got bottled water. So there is a lot of work to do when a boiled water notice is issued in any of those industries. Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mayor Tracy. I agree a lot with what Kerry has said. I'm more focusing on the when. As only the Prime Minister this morning said, you know, a lot of the infrastructure and the way different places have ended up in different times is because they kept rates lower for a longer time. And I know our rules have all changed, but I feel for the ratepayers, because next year everything is going to get worse. That's from all the economists. I'm a realist. So I'm not a pessimist, but we have to do something, but exactly which part and how much of it we have to do, that's probably the question. And exactly, and because we've got 6.3 here, and then we're going to go out here, but it's just accumulating debt. And time, yeah, I'm pleased we brought it back to 50, because as we know, if we said 100, we're all going to be dead. All our children are going to be dead in 100 years, guarantee it. So being a realist, yeah, and what Pete's been saying too, Councillor Peter, the answer's not easy. The answer's not easy. I'm not going to put my hand up and say, yeah, do it, but I am going to say we need to do something. The clip tanks, yes, I've got no problems there, but that clip tank price is quite ambiguous, really. The clip tank's 400, but to get it on site and get it running is a different figure again. So that comes into that 6.3 there somewhere. And then we've got a testing. I'm not that over with a treatment plant, with the treated water thing, because 2021 was when the last time it hit the fan. So I'm also a bit of a risk taker. That's my input.
Let's go to Brian for a comment there.
Just want to quickly touch on the price for the clip tanks. So 400. None of these costs the targets. So, but we've been sort of realistic in terms of, so if it costs 200, then we only draw 200. We don't put the money in our bank and then rake for it and keep the leftover. So we're only, we believe the 400 K is probably higher, because we're now got plans around utilising our current clip tanks. So that's more than likely going to be considerably lower. However, if I was to be perfectly honest, and if we were looking at which way to go with and which way not to go, I'd be saying the pre-treatment, because that's I think you can't underestimate the risk of not treating during high turbidity events. Weighted, I know, against the cost of what we're proposing of that 3.2 million for the pre-treatment, that risk would, if we carried that, would, I think, cause everyone around this table sleepless nights every time there's a drop of rain that builds into more than a drop of rain.
Thanks, Brian. And can I just clarify with you, Hamish, that was one of the questions that came forward, that did include the earthworks, those costs, so it's not on top.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you, Councillor Johns, followed by Councillor Chase and Councillor Peter Weber.
Worship. Yes. I guess I'm in two minds. Essentially, as per my comments before, I think I'd take the risk, take the bet that we can get through, even if there was a boil water notice. And add on another couple of clip tanks, say have 3 clip tanks up there. They're a readily tradable item these days. I guess that's how I feel. My gut feel is that's the way we should go. But is it possible, we've got a lot of daddy big people here in the room, to get them to put their hands up if they prefer to spend 3.2 million?
No, it's not, Councillor Johns. It doesn't work that way in an official meeting. And I was even informed around the no public forum, but we will consult heavily and go back to the community. So I said, no, it's not. Yeah, thanks. Can I just go to Councillor Chase, please? Just for members of the public, that's not the way a normal council meeting would run, and I'm not going to deviate from that process. So, yeah.
Thank you for you, Mayor Tracy. The decision that we're going to have to make for me, myself, I'm having to weigh up the risk and costs, and I see the pros and cons, and the cons will be the continuous cost that this project is actually forecast to cost us all, but how we manage that is going to be how we can best make decisions for that. The debt, the future debt, that's another con for me. But the pros as for the risk, I also see cost and risk, not only for us financially as a council with fines and stuff, but for our businesses, our schools, our community. We could lose confidence. Our community will lose confidence in us. The cost is our schools, our businesses. Who would want to come here and run a business if we're constantly having boil water notices and we're not able to supply and actually abide by what we want our objective is, and that is to provide a safe drinking water for our community. That's a risk that we lose if we don't do this project. So for me, I agree with nearly all of you. I agree with Sharon. My concerns is with the future costs for our community, for our families. I agree with Councillor Sutherland about the infrastructure, that we actually do need it. So for me, I am struggling because the cost is getting to me, but I do think that honestly, this will be a benefit for our community and for the future of our community and our families. So I will be supporting the purchases for what we need to get done.
Thank you, thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of comments from me. So I do agree with slowing the project down. It has always scared me. This is a lot of money, and it felt rushed, and I can see it now through the peer reviewers. Still haven't, they haven't agreed on some of the decisions. So we're still waiting for that information to come out as well. So slowing the project down, it gives us more time to look at our options. And we've still got the soil testing and the embankment, which could really change this project, altogether. From the decisions we make today could change easily in a month's time, with what the results are going to come back with the embankment. I'm happy with the risk being reduced by the pre-treatment and the clip tanks. But yeah, there's still a lot of factors in our decisions that have got to come in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Peter Weber. Councillor Wallace, you had a question, comment?
Just a quick one I forgot to mention. As we know, we haven't got a government formed yet, and the new government that's been elected Because there could be, and that's another thing our present Prime Minister said this morning, quote, he said, we did a lot of work with local LGNZ and there was a lot of work going through, as we all know, there has been, and there are different things coming forward out of that. And we don't know because no one's told anyone about what is and going. Time is something that in a week or so, or what is the official date when the new government's formed? No, they've got to form the coalition. I don't know. The coalition happens. That doesn't happen on Friday. But anyhow, that is another thing, a key factor in this, because we were looking at some, there could be changes again that could be playing into our favour. That's the other thing I forgot to bring up before about the when, and a bit like what our deputy Liam was just saying. Thank you.
Your Worship, and Councillor Wallace, I think that there's a good points there. If you go back pre-election, there's this thing called affordable waters, 3 waters, that was out and about, and we were earmarked to transfer our debt and our assets to the new water entity in October 2025. So the new government has come in now, and one of their pre-election statements and policy was to repeal the 3 waters legislation. However, something that the national government and its potential partners have spoken about is that there is still a need to create a 3 waters entity of sorts, and it will be left up to the councils, regional, in terms of multiple councils, to design these water entities. So I don't know what they will look like in the future, but no one's has said to us, and not even the incoming government has said, stop doing what you're doing in terms of trying to prepare for something. And at a regional level, there has been work being done to set up a new water entity subject to a range of other decisions. And with that will be the likelihood of debt going to a new entity. And although today I can't sit here and say that this is what that's going to look like, but if we're looking at 50 years or 5 or 10 years, very, very unlikely that we'll be sitting here owning our 3 water assets. Well, sorry, likely we will be owning our 3 water assets, but it will be under a totally different umbrella or totally different model. And this affordability question is likely to be right throughout every council in the country. Will be having discussions around the inability for communities to pay for their 3 water assets. Hence the reason why both Labor and National have said that we can't continue to do things like we are. So even though I can't comment on what the government is going to do, we know that this whole 3 waters model debt will change in the future. The question, I guess, that remains is when that will happen and what that will look like. But it will continue to work. We'll continue to work down that pathway.
You, Councillor Sutherland.
Just one final little comment, thanks, Mayor Tracy. It's been mentioned on the timeframes, and I brought this up at our meeting on the 18th of October, but I think you have to be cautious. We might be very lucky to be able to continue the major project within the timeframes talked. Actually, if we look at all the big projects, you really get them done successfully in time. And I think if we're making some judgments on price and cost, we've really got to think another year. I think you probably just have to put another 12 months on this. Erin did touch on the point, and I meant to bring that up. I'm not pessimistic, but I'm realistic about these sort of projects going to plan time-wise. So.
No, thanks, Councillor Sutherland. And I think it was slowing it down to ensure that we get it right. We've got a critical test to back on that embankment, and that really does play a big factor in the decision making that's going forward. So we don't have all of the information. I think for me, we've talked about risk reduction. Now, when you're in private business, you can take calculated risks based on the information that you've got. We're actually in the public service, and we don't take those sort of risks, and especially around the safety of a water supply. And I understand firsthand the trauma that is caused when these water notices go on. We've had them in Ekirahona, we've had them at Pongaroa. Now, sometimes in Pongaroa, they know that the conditions of that, and I understand the chief executive saying that people can get complacent and they don't pay attention to that. I've been told that by residents with a smile sometimes. So I think for me, in the public service, we don't take those risks, and I do see this as part of reducing the risk to our people's safety, also to our reputation for businesses and people wanting to come here. Councillors, I think what I'll do with the recommendation, I'd like to A, call division on it, and B, take that recommendation in the 5 parts that are listed there. And if there's nothing further, Councillor Long, you've got one further.
Oh, through you, Mayor Tracy. Just a couple of things that haven't been discussed was because of the costs involved here and the period of time, which could be just a year or less, and Councillor Ellison was talking about restaurants. I would have been delivering water, drinking water, standard water to restaurants, schools, hairdressers on that board notice if it was required. I feel that would be cheaper than doing what we're doing. We talked earlier on about water tanks years ago putting on houses. I don't know where we are with that, encouraging ratepayers to put water tanks on. Filters, could be cheaper to put filters in every house and the council to pay for them. And the other thing is, when we're talking about this community, it's the community we're looking at here of Dannevirke, but it's the ratepayers of Tararua who are going to pay for this. So that is mindful too. Thank you.
I'll just make a couple of comments where Councillor Long. So absolutely, it is the ratepayers of the Tararua District that do meet that. That is part of, and I guess when I think about Ralph, back in the early days, we are one district and we have cross-subsidised, which was no different to the entities. We did that when the impounded supply was first built. We've done that in Pahiatua with the water treatment plant and with all of the wastewater treatment plants, because as individual towns, it's very, very difficult. So it would be met by all of the ratepayers of the Tararua District. In regards to supplying water, that doesn't, Councillor Franklin was talking about the hospitality industry. When those machines are plumbed into the water systems, that actually isn't possible to do that. It is a large amount of water, and we do that with a public water notice. But we have water stored here for civil defence. I'm not sure how you would just store that many bottles of water given what we face. And during those board water notices, we have pulled tankers in from Fonterra that have really helped us in enabling people had access to water. So some of that is a little bit more difficult, but you also can't mix for putting tanks in on houses, we can't mix that water. So those are rain butts. So they're specifically for that. And I don't know, I'm presuming someone else here would know the answer, but I don't think Taumata Arawai would be completely comfortable with the filters on houses for that either. I don't think that would meet. Am I correct, Hamish?
Yes, almost there, Mayor Tracy. The filter may remove the particles out of the water, but it won't remove the viruses and the bacteria that we use chlorine and UV for to kill. They're just way too small for any sort of filter to be practical.
But thanks for those comments, because we are all, looking for those, that innovation and those ideas and what we can do different. So really appreciate that. Right, councillors. So we've got I'll take the recommendations. The first recommendation is that the council delay the decision to commence the remediation works to the Denneberg impounded supply until the design work is complete, including geotechnical investigation and liner system confirmation. It is likely this will mean a delay to any permanent repairs until the 24-25 season. Do I have moved Councillor Johns, seconded Councillor Gilmore? All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Recommendation 1.2 that the council approve the project objectives for the detailed design of the repairs to the impounded supply. Moved Councillor Wards, seconded Councillor Long. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. That recommendation 1.3 that the council approve up to $3.2 million to purchase a pre-treatment plant and $400,000 to purchase a raw water storage clip tank singular. Do I have a mover for that motion? Moved by Councillor Chase, seconded by Councillor Petty-Weber. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Okay, so I'll record those motions against. So Councillor Long, Councillor Wallace, Councillor Johns. Any further against? The motion is carried and we'll record those decisions. Recommendation 1.4 that the council approve up to $2.5 million to purchase a 6 megalitre treated water storage tank. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Franklin, seconded Councillor Wards. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Any further councillors against that motion? Okay, we'll record that. Thank you, Councillor Long. The motion is carried. 1.5 that the council notes the other works being investigated to improve resilience to the Denneberg water supply, of which any implementation decision will be brought back to council. Moved Councillor Wallace, seconded Councillor Sutherland. Thank you, councillors. Very thorough session. Yep. Sorry, just for there was no one against your motion. Sorry, Councillor Long was against that one, so the motion is carried. 1.5 is carried with Councillor Long's dissenting vote recorded. Oh, okay, sorry, you weren't against that motion. My error. Okay, so the council notes that other works being investigated to improve resilience to the Denneberg water supply, of which any implementation decision will be brought back to council, is moved by Councillor Ward, seconded by Councillor Wallace, seconded by Councillor Sutherland. All those in favour? It was unanimous. Thank you. Motion carried. Clarification. Right, thank you, councillors. That was a very long session, but those questions needed to be asked. The public will want to know this, and we will be having a public meeting. What I might do is ask people maybe during lunch, we'll get our diaries out and notify the media of that date, and also perhaps a Facebook Live as soon as we've decided that. And I'll just make sure that we've got the officers and people that we need to be able to have that and answer those questions. Okay. Right. Thank you. Further, I will close us with a karakia. I will make myself and some of the staff available for the media if you have further questions following the meeting. Okay. Right. Thank you very, very much for that. It was a long session on something that is incredibly important to this community. Let the winds of the Ruahine and Tararua give you strength. Let the waters of the Manawatu nourish you, for we are the Pounamu of Te Tāpiri Nui o Whātonga. Kia ora and thank you.
Excuse me, sorry, when Councillor Johns earlier